Vraya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Askadyade Siddhaya. So today we're going to read from the Bhagavad Gita as it is. And chapter 15, text number 5, called the Yoga of the Supreme Person. If the internet goes off here, then we'll just try to reconnect because the internet here is very unstable. Nirmana mohadita sangadosha adhyatma nitya vinivritta kama dvandvaya mukha sukha dukkha sangha gachan imuda padam abhyam tat. Those who are free from false prestige, illusion, false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, and are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who unbewildered know how to surrender into the Supreme Person, attain to that eternal kingdom. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The surrendering process is described here very nicely. The first qualification is that one should not be deluded by pride, because the conditioned soul is puffed up, thinking himself the Lord of material nature. It is very difficult for him to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should know by the cultivation of real knowledge that he is not the Lord of material nature. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Lord. When one is free from a delusion caused by pride, he can begin the process of surrender. For one who is already expecting some honor in this material world, it is not possible to surrender to the Supreme Person. Pride is due to illusion, for although one comes here, stays for a brief time, and then goes away, he has the foolish notion that he is the Lord of the world. Thus he makes all things complicated, and he is always in trouble. The whole world moves under this impression. People are considering the land, this earth, to belong to human society, and they have divided the land under the false impression that they are the proprietors. One has to get out of this false notion that human society is the proprietor of this world. When one is freed from such a false notion, becomes free from all false association caused by familiar, social, and national affections. These faulty associations bind one to this material world. After this stage, one has to develop spiritual knowledge. One has to cultivate knowledge of what is actually his own, what is actually not his own. When one has an understanding of things as they are, he becomes free from all dual conceptions, such as happiness and distress, pleasure and pain. Becomes full in knowledge, and it's possible for him to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nirmana moha jita sangadosha adhyatmanitya vinivritta kama dvandvaya mukha sukha sangha vichantya buddha padam avyam tat. Those who are free from false prestige, illusion, false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, who are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, unbewildered, know how to surrender into the Supreme Person, attain to that eternal kingdom. Om Agyanatvanandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksur Umilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Srila Prabhupada has mentioned that our philosophy of Krishna consciousness is the most exacting, voluminous, and consistent due to the unbreakable system of disciplic succession. So here again, in this particular verse, we have a summary of many of the conceptions that Krishna has talked about in other verses. But as in Prabhupada's purport, it's illuminated from a different point of view. For instance, in the prayers by Lord Chaitanya, when he talks about the glories of the holy name and why somehow or another, well, he says the holy name is so glorious, but somehow or another, when he chants the holy name, he's not experiencing the ecstasy that's promised by the first sloka, the Shikshashtaka. Instead, he says, he begins with Trinadapi Sunichena Tareva Sahishnuna in the next verse, that one should become humble like the straw in the street and more tolerant than the tree. So this is confirmed throughout Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna begins to express what is the process of gaining knowledge, beginning with Amadidvam. First business is Amadidvam, humility. Now, Prabhupada explains that humility doesn't mean to think oneself or to have lack of self-esteem, thinking that I'm rotten and I'm fallen. Without Krishna consciousness, that is not very valuable. To understand in relation to Krishna what humility is, that's valuable. Because Krishna in Bhagavad Gita has said, Bhaktaram yagatapasam sarvalokam maheshwaram suridam sarvabhutanam yatvamam shantim richiti. The sages who know me as the ultimate supreme lord of all planets and demigods. So out of ignorance, in the mode of ignorance, we think ourselves to be the proprietors of this material world. Of course, what is the material world? It is an ever-flowing manifestation of the natural, subtle and gross elements. At every moment, everything is being changed. We can see at any moment, everything is exactly the same as it was in the last moment. And we have nothing to do with the changing in the sense that we cannot stop anything from changing. Any more than if we put our hand in the water, we can stop a river from changing. We may try to put our hand in the river, but all the water from the river will just flow past our hand. In the same way, under the influence of time, the three modes of material nature are constantly changing and producing different varieties of karma, which will produce different manifestations of the material nature in the future. So actually, time in the material world is supreme. This is confirmed by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna was wondering, what is this universal form? Now, we're saying the universal form, but we're not exactly seeing it as Arjuna was seeing the universal form. In other words, Arjuna saw the whole universal form in a certain manifestation. We're observing a very small part of that universal form from our very small, tiny point of view.
Maharaj, my most sincere apologies. And I know you probably think you are not speaking very, very fast, but I apologize very, very much. But could you please slow down? Dear devotees, please don't take it that Maharaj is just slow. He's just doing me a favor because I have to translate this brilliant and wonderful and fantastic personality into the language, which not exactly easy to translate to. Okay, please forgive me, Maharaj, for interrupting.
Okay,
Please
no
do
problem.
accommodate 17 people who also wants to participate. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Thank you for reminding me. So, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was very disturbed after seeing the universal form. So he asked Krishna, Agyaki Kemo Kevo Bhavan Ugarupo, Namo Namaste Sahasrakritva, Namo Namaste Vigyatami Jami Vivantamadhyam, Ihi Prajan Namitava Pravitim. Agyaki me ko bhavan ugrupo. Arjuna would say, Agyaki me ko bhavan ugrupo. This is a very horrible feature of yours. Bhavantama adhyatma agyaki me ko bhavan ugrupo. Namostu te raprasida. I want to offer you my obeisances. Namostu te raprasida. Vigyatam ichami bhavantam, but I want to know, what is the purpose, pravritim? What is the purpose of this universal form? Devouring warriors, fires coming from your mouth, so many faces, so many arms. What is this all about? Arjuna had a different point of view than we have presently. But Krishna explained, Kalosmi loka sheye prarido, lokanta mahartami ha paritak, itepi tvam nabivishanti sarve, evastita pratnikeshi yoda. Time I am, the destroyer of all the worlds, and have come here to engage all the people, except you, the Pandavas, all the soldiers on both sides will be slain. So, Krishna is directly involved in this material nature in the form of time. He doesn't personally take place in this material nature, but he does influence it by time. Under time, material nature is working. Of course, we know that Krishna is neutral. As he says, nadate kasutit papam, na papam sukritim vibhu, agyana navritam jnanam, tena uyanti jantava. Nor is the Supreme Lord assuming anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. So we're not aware that we're being influenced by the material nature in the form of desire. Or as Prabhupada says, desire is a subtle form of conditioning for the soul. So when we choose the wrong desires, when we become attached to the wrong desire, or in other words, when we desire to fulfill the wrong desire that our mind is presenting to us, then we become bewildered by the illusory energy. And Krishna, he's in our heart, and according to what we deserve, he'll make the arrangements to fulfill those desires. And the result is that we find ourselves in different material circumstances. The desire may be in goodness, it may be in passion, it may be in ignorance. So one desire will lead us to the heavenly planet, another desire will bring us back to this earthly sphere, while another desire will degrade us into the lower species of life, depending on what desire we desire to fulfill. Now there's also spiritual desire. Except for spiritual desire, that is to desire what Krishna wants us to desire, as it says in the next verse in the 11th chapter. Tasmat twamutishti sholavasva jidvad shatrambhushma rajantramidam mayavataniyatam purvameva nimitram matram bhavasavasachem. Just get up and prepare to fight, and upon conquering the enemy, you'll enjoy our flourishing kingdom. They're already put to death by my arrangement, and you, O Savasachi, can be but an instrument in the fight. In other words, Arjuna, the best thing he could do would to become an instrument for Krishna. And to become an instrument for Krishna, as Prabhupada explains in the 18th chapter, verse 57 of the Bhagavad Gita, Chaitasa sarva karmani maya sanyasi matpraha Udiyogam upashitya machita sadatam bhava. In all activities, depend upon me. In other words, our first business is to find out what Krishna wants us to do. But the background for that is with his energy, of course. His energy includes our body, our mind, and our words, and everything else that our body, mind, and words can utilize. So to accept that Krishna is the proprietor, and then we become interested in finding out what Krishna wants us to do with his energies. And we find out what Krishna wants us to do by Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So the manifestation of our accepting our subordination to Krishna, that everything belongs to him, is manifested by our inquiring from Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra what Krishna wants us to do with his energies. And as soon as we stop that inquiry, and of course we understand that both Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, they're all in harmony with each other. And the basis of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra is always Shastra. Of course, to understand Shastra is understand that we have to see, as it says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita about Madhavendra Puri, that we understand what the purport of Shastra is through the activities of a pure devotee. How a pure devotee is engaged in utilizing Krishna's energies, following his instructions and his mission to, for instance, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has come to give love of God to all living entities. Even in the Jharikanda forest, he had the tigers and the lions. He had the deer chanting Hare Krishna. They were all dancing in ecstasy. Even the tigers were embracing the deer and kissing each other. It probably wasn't, they weren't soulmates, but in any case, they were in ecstasy. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission is quite clear, and we can understand what the Shastra says by the activities of a devotee. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, for instance, was acting as a perfect devotee. When Krishna comes as a devotee, we can understand he's displaying exactly what it means to apply the scripture in this age. Otherwise, as William Blake said, we both read this Bible day and night. I read black and you read white. But when Krishna personally comes himself and displays the activities of a pure devotee, what he considers to be appropriate for a pure devotee to do in this age, then all other pure devotees will be judged by how they follow in the footsteps of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, how they dovetail their desires with the desires of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's called humility. Become, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself has said, Naham Vipra Nachanara Patira Naham Vapi Nasudro. He didn't identify himself with any position in the material world. He did identify himself as Gopi Bharata Padakamalayur Dasa Dasa Anudasa, as the servant of the servant of the servant of the gopis who are the servants of Krishna. Now, that service, as he says, Krishna himself, in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says, Yari Deka, Tari Kaha, Krishna Upadesh, Amara Aga Guru Tari Desh. That whoever we meet, our business is to think about how we can help them become Krishna conscious. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu displayed that by even getting the tigers and the lions to dance, get the elephants to roll in ecstasy. He did it by, in his meetings with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya or the Buddhist monks, he got them to become Krishna conscious. So this is the beginning of not only recognizing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission, but actually serving it, utilizing his energies, the energies of Krishna, and utilizing it as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had desired us to, or is desiring us to utilize. So this is actually humility. This is what's known as becoming a servant of the servant of the servant. Srila Prabhupada, we recognize as a pure devotee of Krishna. I mean, among his accomplishments was that he spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. He translated so many books about Krishna, giving us the direction of how to become Krishna conscious. In other words, his whole life was 100% dedicated to the service of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He wasn't necessarily an expert marriage maker, as I've said before, nor was he a financial advisor. He didn't always act as a health guru, only the very beginning when there was no other alternative. But he did dedicate his life to giving a direction of how we can occupy our senses, our mind and intelligence in Krishna's service. And what does Krishna say? How do we become humble? Humble in the sense to see what's actually going on. Now, in illusion, everyone is walking around thinking there's a possibility of becoming advanced and lording it over the material world, getting ahead of others, getting more wealth, getting more fame, getting more influence, getting more material, more knowledge. So this type of attitude is actually not the attitude of a devotee. It's directly in competition with Krishna. Because in a competition with Krishna, no one in this world ever wins. Therefore, tad buddhyas, tad atmanas, tad nishtas, tad parayanaha, kajatnyama prana arvitim, jnanani dutta kalmashaha. We hear about Krishna, how he's manifested in this world in the form of time, for instance. Now, who can deny that? What sane person will say that they're not being influenced by time, or that they don't see anything else in this world influenced by time? Any sane person will admit that time is influencing everything in this world, and yet time never changes. There's nothing in this world that can affect time. Therefore, any sane person will recognize that time is supreme in this world, supreme controller of everything. And time is not working arbitrarily. Otherwise, the sun wouldn't arise at a certain time and set at a certain time. So everyone should feel subordinate, at least to time, and not waste it. And not waste it means to know what the purpose of the controller of time is. And the controller of time, Krishna, he's given us a suggestion that we should utilize our time tad buddhayas, tad atmanas, to put our mind in Krishna consciousness, to see things properly, in other words. And when we see things properly, then we'll understand tad buddhayas, tad atmanas, tad nishta, and that the purpose of life is to get free from time, not to utilize time to get more entangled in the material world, to waste our time getting more and more entangled in the material energy. that's a complete waste of time. But to utilize our time to get out of this false conception that we're this body. Because not only time is not influenced by the material nature, but it should be understood that we're also not influenced by the material nature. But even though both time, under Krishna's direction, and ourselves are not influenced by the material nature, still we're subordinate to time. Time is not going to transfer itself from one body to another, but we will. Therefore, the controller of time is not influenced by time. Otherwise, as time would change, then he would change too, from one form to a next. But we have to change, so we're subordinate to time. So, obviously, the purpose of life with such an understanding is to realize that we have to become humble and not think we're the controllers of the universe, but take Krishna's instructions and try to utilize our time, the time that we're under, or the time that we have in this body, to engage the energies of Krishna in his service. As Krishna says, become an instrument for Krishna. And that instrument means specifically to practice Krishna consciousness in the association of devotees, to help each other become Krishna conscious, and to help innocent people become Krishna conscious also. So that's called surrender. That's part of surrender. In other words, to stop identifying ourselves as the possible controllers of this universe or any part of it, and to simply take shelter of Krishna. So again, that's done by hearing, putting the mind on Krishna, getting out of the material concept of life, as explained in this verse, and then taking shelter, realizing the necessity for us to take shelter of Krishna, not only during our practice of sadhana, but 24 hours a day. Therefore, in that verse, Krishna says, Chaitasa sarva karmani, maya sannyasi matparaha, buddhiyogam upashitya, machitak satatam bhava. In all activities. So that means all activities, whatever we're doing. We should first examine whether this activity is actually for Krishna's service and whether it's actually authorized by Krishna. Then we should find out whether it's authorized by inquiring from Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And our main guru in our society that everyone follows or should follow is Srila Prabhupada. And fortunately, he has given us his literature where he's given us an opportunity to understand and assimilate and see things from different points of view, so that we can understand that we should at least chant Hare Krishna. We should at least bring Krishna into our lives through the holy name. We should bring Krishna into this universe and make him present through the chanting of Hare Krishna. And at the same time, we should engage our body, mind, and words in trying to help others understand the necessity that they also bring Krishna into this world through their body, mind, and words, through the chanting of the holy name and spreading it to others through pure devotional service, and engaging ourselves in the 5 powerful processes of chanting Hare Krishna, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, worshiping the deities, trying to make the atmosphere spiritual, and serving the devotees, especially under the guidance of the superior devotees such as Srila Prabhupada. Then the humility will naturally come, because as false prestige, falsely imagining ourselves being controllers of this universe in any part of it, realizing that whatever happens is according to Krishna, he's going to decide everything. All we can do is desire to serve his mission and leave the rest to him. Then our illusion will go away. Being submerged in this ocean of time and being washed away in the waves of time, when we take hold of Krishna's lotus feet through his instructions and serve those lotus feet, then Krishna, as a picture we've seen, Krishna will come riding on the back of Garuda to pick us up from this ocean of birth and death and deliver us. But as it says here in this verse, that when we become free from false prestige and illusion, we shouldn't forget we also have to get free from false association. Getting free from false association means our attachment to our place of birth, our identification with our family, etc. Because we may understand theoretically that we're Krishna's servants, but if we get into the wrong association, like Bharat Maharaj, he was on almost on the platform of Bhava, pure love of God. He unfortunately associated even with a deer calf and became bewildered and fell down. Now, he didn't associate with the calf out of animosity. He associated purely out of concern for a living entity who was suffering. But that concern became disproportionate to reality because of his attachment he developed for it. And therefore, he thought himself to be not necessarily the proprietor of the deer, not necessarily the enjoyer of the deer calf. He thought he was the savior of the deer calf. But that was enough to put him into illusion. In ignorance, we think ourselves to be the proprietors and the doers. In passion, we think we're going to enjoy in this material world somehow or another, or some part of it. And in goodness, we want to be the saviors. To even become a savior of a deer calf is very dangerous in this world. Not that we don't necessarily give the deer calf prashadam or chant to it, but we don't become its mother and forget our devotional service. Then, when we actually get free from false association, and that's only really possible completely by taking complete shelter of a pure devotee such as Srila Prabhupada and coming to the platform of Nishta. No longer identifying ourselves with this body, no longer being influenced by illusion, and no longer being associated with some false conception of this is my land of birth, this is my family, etc. Of course, we don't neglect our family. We do our duty. Even Prabhupada, when he was preaching at the beginning of his being president in New York, when he was in the Bowery, and there was quite an anti-war movement going on, and Prabhupada was talking about Arjuna fighting, Krishna inducing Arjuna to fight in the battlefield Kurukshetra. And there was objections on the part of his audience. Why is Krishna causing Arjuna to fight? We cannot fight in such an unjust war. But Prabhupada didn't agree with them. He said, this is your duty. You're born in this country. You're taking advantage of this facility, and the government is ordering you to fight. Therefore, it's your duty to follow the instruction. Of course, Prabhupada also did not want his devotees to get drafted and go fight for a war such as in Vietnam, because he understood that, first of all, the devotees had a higher chorus, and number two, that the fighting was not a religious fight. So for the devotees who have a higher cause, who actually understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they were not subjected to that duty of having to serve the government. But for those who had no higher understanding, but they were taking advantage of living in America, then Prabhupada felt that it was their duty to follow the instructions of the authorities. At least that would do them some good. Anyhow, that's a little complicated. But the point is that becoming free from false prestige, illusion, and false association, then we can understand the eternal. By taking shelter of a devotee such as Prabhupada, his example, and serving the mission, then we can come to the platform of Nishta. And from Nishta, we can understand the eternal, and then we won't be influenced by any kind of material desires. So this has also been explained in another part of the Bhagavad Gita. Yesham andikatam bhabam jananam punya karmanam tedvanva moha nirmukva bhajante mam drida vritaha. That those who are free from past sinful activities, who have acted piously, are free from the duality of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. So this verse is more or less an explanation of the other verse. The other verse says that in the beginning, we try to act religiously. Religiously means mercy, truthfulness, austerity, and cleanliness. In other words, we follow some principles of religion. We don't eat meat or fish or eggs. We don't take intoxication. We don't gamble. We don't have illicit sex, because we understand that there are certain principles which will elevate our consciousness, and there's certain principles that will degrade our consciousness. So by following those principles, we can act piously. We can act in the higher level of material nature, understand the necessity of sacrificing for Vishnu, and therefore conquer sinful reactions. Conquer sinful reactions means, without identifying ourselves with the gross and subtle body, without falsely trying to control the material nature, without being influenced by illusion and false association, we don't accept these false ideas. Instead, we accept the eternal idea of being Krishna's servant and let the false ideas go through our minds and only accept the real ideas to desire to fulfill them. Then we'll come to the platform of understanding the eternal. And when we understand the eternal, then in the association of Krishna, then material lust will no longer influence us. And we'll become free from the dualities of happiness and distress. We come to the platform of liberation, and we won't be bewildered. Then we'll be willing to follow the instructions of Krishna in any circumstance. That's called liberation. And we'll know what Krishna wants us to do and how to do it, and why we should do it, and we'll be enthusiastic to do it. Because we know that Krishna, whatever he does, is ultimately perfect for ourselves and for everyone else. Therefore, without doubt, we'll be able to engage fully in Krishna's devotional service, and then we'll become eligible to attain to the eternal kingdom. So it takes practice and it takes knowledge also. We're not artificially trying to become humble, but knowledge will show us that there's no need to artificially becoming humble because our position is that we are eternal servants of either Krishna or illusion. And if we serve illusion, the fact that we think we're going to control anything in this world except for our own minds by engaging them in Krishna's service, then that's called illusion. And under such illusion, we get entangled. We may try to solve our lust and our anger and greed. We may try to get out of illusion in different ways, but without serving Krishna and his instructions, we just get more and more entangled in different phases of illusion, different phases of material desire. And therefore, understanding things properly means simply to every day engage in our practice of sadhana bhakti, try to engage ourselves in some way or another to further the Hare Krishna movement. And that will gradually, Krishna will give us the intelligence by which all these things, all the false prestige, our illusion, our false association will go away, and then we'll understand more and more what it means to live in eternity. And we won't be influenced by anything else. And the dualities of happiness and distress will not bother us anymore. And in that unbewildered state, we'll be able to be steadily engaged in Krishna's service in any circumstance. So I'll read the verse again. Nirmana moha jita sangha dosha adhyatma nitya vinivrita kama dvandvari mukta sukha sangar gachanti muda pudam avyam tat. Those who are free from false prestige, illusion, false association, will understand the eternal and are done with material lust and are free from the dualities of happiness and distress and who unbewildered know how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attain to that eternal kingdom. Another way I was thinking of how to look at it when Krishna says, Jayate Vishate, Dayato Vishayam Pumsam, Sangasteshu Pajayate, Sangha Sanjayate Kama, Kama Krodo Vijayate. As soon as we forget who we are, then we look around for something to enjoy in the world. In other words, as soon as we forget that we're Krishna's eternal servant, then at once we start thinking ourselves, we look around to see what we can control in the material world to enjoy. And when we think like that, then at once Maya captures us. Krishna Bahir Mukha Bhagavan Chetare, Nitatastat Tare Japiti Dare. As soon as we turn our face away from Krishna and look at this world with the idea, what can I control and what can I enjoy, then Maya provides us or covers us with lust, which left unchecked turns into greed, which later on turns into anger, and then we wind up in illusion. So to think ourselves to be other than Krishna's servant, that's called false prestige. And that turns into illusion. And in illusion, we naturally look for false association to satisfy our desires, illusion. Instead of seeing everyone as Krishna's servant, we see those are in this world as friends and enemies, those who can help me fulfill my desires, and those who are obstacles to my fulfilling desires. And we take false association with those who we think are going to lead us to a path of fulfilling our material desires. But when we give that up and take shelter of pure devotees, such as Srila Prabhupada, and understand we're eternal, then even if the material lust is present, we won't be influenced by it because we'll think it's will understand it's just a trap for putting us into a material conception, for bringing us back into false association, illusion, and false prestige, and forgetting our eternality. So we won't be tricked by Maya anymore. And when the further proof of that, of the further development of that, is in any circumstance, like Prahlad Maharaj or the Pandavas, they won't be interested in taking shelter of anything or anyone else besides Krishna and his pure devotees. And then such an unbewildered state, one will 24 hours a day engage in Krishna's service and therefore become eligible to attain to the spiritual kingdom. So I'll stop there. Think any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you so much for allowing me to join. I just enjoy your classes and I missed very much. And I have a question. This question is about duty performance because it's on high this pattern, and I would like respectfully to ask for further clarification on the subject of duty, if you could. Grateful for your guidance. And I would like respectfully to ask for further clarification on related and sensitive issue. Can you elaborate on situations where devotees leave their families, particularly when this involved abandoning their children in order to practice or advance Krishna consciousness? Because from a psychological perspective, this often appears as not genuine attachment or elevated devotion, but rather as an avoidance of duty and responsibility. Such actions can cause deep and lasting harm to the children who may carry this pain through their lives. That raises serious concerns not only about well-being of the children involved, but also about personal karma and the broader perception of Krishna consciousness, because Krishna repeatedly instructs us to perform our duty. Isn't the primary duty of a mother and father, having brought children into this world, to care for them and fulfill the parental responsibilities? How should we understand spiritual pursuits that seem to come at the cost of abandoning these essential obligations? Would Krishna accept the service from those who neglect their responsibilities themselves created? They created that. How do we distinguish true attachment, which arises from maturity, responsibility, and inner renunciation, from psychological avoidance that may be mistaken for spiritual advancement? Can you please? Sorry, it's a very sensitive issue, but I'm working with that. That's why it's important for me to have your answer. Thank you, Guru Maharaj. Thank you for your guidance.
Yeah, I don't think I can answer it. It would take quite a while to answer that question. But in general, we have to accept authority. As long as we're sincere and understanding we're in the material concept of life, if we look in the mirror and see someone other than Krishna's eternal servant, then we should understand our activities are subject to error, and therefore we need a guider, someone to guide us, an authority. Therefore, that's why Prabhupada created a society of devotees where there can be some guidance from superior devotees. Because if we act independently, then we'll get lost. In other words, Krishna says, Yada hankara ashitya, yotsi dimanyase, vidyaisha vyavisayaste, prakritis tvam yokshasi. Or he said after that, he said, Chaitasa sarvakaramani maya sannyasimat praha buddhi yogam upashitya maschita sadatam bhava. So we have to take shelter of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. We may accept everything belongs to Krishna and want to serve him, but to find out how to serve Krishna, we have to take shelter of Krishna's instructions in the Bhagavad Gita, as well as under the guidance of the representative of Krishna. Otherwise, Krishna says, Maschita sarvadoragani, mat prasada tarishyasi, atat chatvam ahankaram, ashoshasi vinangshasi. If you do not act according to my instructions, you'll be led by a false ego. Maschita sarvadoragani. If you act according to my instructions, then you'll pass over all the obstacles of conditional life by my grace. If, however, you don't act following my instructions and act out of false ego, you'll be lost. So if we want to do anything, what to speak of a major activity, such as abandoning our family, then we have to take shelter of Krishna's instructions, as well as a bona fide representative of Krishna, a bona fide representative of Krishna. Otherwise, if we act whimsically, then we'll be lost. If we act according to false ego, then simply we'll be lost, we'll be misdirected. And yes, then we'll have to incur karma. As far as any activities besides that, it's not that even if one does a sinful activity, it's not that he's lost completely. He can't perform devotional service. But obviously, an activity which is impacting those he's vowed to take a responsibility for, then it's going to obviously be a big obstacle towards advancing devotional service. If Ramara Jushabde says, Gurur nasasyad, swajano nasasyad, pita nasasyan, swajano nasasyan, Gurur nasasyan, daivam nasasyan, swajan pitas nasasyan, nimoksha yaksu paiti mrityum. One should not become a father or a mother or a guru or a spiritual master or a worshipful demigod, worshipful person. He's not prepared to deliver his dependents from birth and death. So if he whimsically gives up that responsibility without proper authorization, then he'll be lost in the material pool for some time at least, and have to suffer the reactions for doing it. It may cover him completely, may not cover, but one will have to come back and take responsibility for disturbing the spiritual lives of others. If you don't act properly, then you may have to see Yamaraj. He said, just like Yamaraj, he acted improperly, and he had to become a Shudra when he condemned Manduka Muni, when he allowed Manduka Muni to also almost be condemned to death because he had pierced one ant in the rectum when he was a baby, when he was a small boy. So he was going to be impaled by a stake because of that very small activity. So then Manduka Muni cursed Yamaraj that he'd become a Shudra. But Prabhupada said even the GBC, if they don't act properly, they'll get their sinful reactions also, and they may have to become a Shudra in their next lifetime. So we have to be careful for our own benefit. Anything else?
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Thank you for a nice class. I have a question related to the last thing you say that Yamaraj did this mistake with Manduka Muni. And at the same time, I read in Bhagavatam 6th canto that Yamaraj is acting through the consultancy of the super soul, so he knows present, future, and past. So in this situation, what is the thing that he made this mistake with Mandukya Muni?
Well, he doesn't know. He's not. He's omniscient. He knows what he has to do to judge people. It doesn't mean he knows everything, like Krishna knows everything. Only Krishna knows perfectly past, present, future. And everyone else knows what Krishna tells them about past, present, and future. On the other hand, it said that Kali Yuga was beginning, and Yamaraj would be overburdened with service. Because usually during the other yugas, few people wind up in Yamaraj's kingdom. But during Kali Yuga, practically everyone has to go down to his kingdom. So he has to work overtime. So he needed a little bit vacation before Kali Yuga began in full force. So he was cursed to become a Shudra in the form of Vidura, get Krishna's association, and take a break from being Yamaraj for a while. But now he's back again, and I'm sure he works 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So he's also waiting for Kali Yuga to end so he can take a break again. So this is Krishna's arrangement to give him a break.
Thank you for your clarification.
Anything else? Okay, thank you very much. Grantharaj Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, for Premanande Haribol.
Hari Hari Bol.
Thank you. Thank you. Maharaj.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Thank you, Lord.
Hare Krishna.